We're here tonight to talk about anti-Semitism. It's the oldest prejudice, if you want to think about it. It's an evil prejudice. It's a monster. And the more I find out about it, the more I think, if we're not able to slay that monster in 2019, how can we face up to all the other prejudices? We thought we did. After the Holocaust, we thought it was over. We said never again, never again, never again. And now here we are. I work on trying to understand Islamist ideology. And Islamist ideology, like all other ideologies and like all other philosophies, it has a vision of the future for society, all society. There's a utopia in place. And part of that utopia is to make the world free of Jews, free of the state of Israel. And if we don't talk about that, I don't think it's courage or bravery or anything like that, but I do feel that it is an obligation to say, isn't this what the other utopias promised?
So I'll say, last week we were at a conference, some colleagues and I from ISGAP, were part of a conference here in Oxford University. And we were an amazing group of scholars. One on our panel was a former member of the Knesset, Avram Nagusa, originally from Ethiopia, a scholar, Yossi Shein from Israel, wonderful colleagues and scholars from the United States. 3 of us were Jewish, 5 people were of African origin, African American, and Jewish and African. And at this conference we were ambushed. We were the ISGAP, Zionist, racist, colonial settlers. I was with my colleague Ansel Brown listening in disbelief as people publicly at a university event were actually referring to my colleagues of African origin as the, I hate to say it, but as the ISGAP Negroes. And that the Zionists were paying to take over this department and the like. And we were stunned. We were shocked. Even though we know these things intellectually, when it happens to you, I think we were all really shocked. And some of us reacted in various ways.
Right.
So what do you, when anti-Semitism is now, I think it's gaining momentum in the academy. The universities are becoming purveyors of this hatred. A generation is being schooled and educated by more and more scholars who have this worldview. How do you deal with it? What is the strategy to deal with this at an intellectual level, to deal with this new hatred that seems to be increasing exponentially?
People will say, well, they're coming out of the woodwork. I get an education on how European anti-Semitism has never gone away. It has gone underground, but it has never gone away. I get an education on that all the time. People point that out to me. But where do they get the license? And as long as you use the language of social justice, and now we are in this realm where I brought you this book because you'll all ask me, what is social justice? I'm going to be 50 years in about 5 months. And the word woke to me is, it's new and foreign. It's like asking me to learn Mandarin. But there is this movement, the social justice movement, and it's coming from the far left. They've always been there. I understand Marxism, I understand Leninism, I understand Trotskyism, even though I can't pronounce it. And I understand their form of anti-Semitism. But what this young generation of millennials are doing is they're saying they're fighting for the planet, they're fighting for minorities' rights, they're fighting for women, they're fighting against oppression. And what the Islamists are doing is they're embedding their anti-Semitism in that language. And so now you have this crazy alliance between the woke people and the anti-Semites on the left who were hiding their anti-Semitism before, or it wouldn't be I mean, look at what's going on with the Labour Party, which, by the way, has got many Jewish members and I would say prominent members. So it is, I think I'm a classical liberal. What attracted me to institutions like Oxford is reason. It is the ability that human beings are able and capable, and that's what differentiates us from animals, is that we can reason our way out of problems. And so applying that reason, I think maybe the first step is to simply expose the problem. People try to medicalize things, and I hate to do that, but I'm going to do it now. You can't fight and defeat cancer if you don't understand cancer cells, the molecules, things that cause it. So all these people in labs who are trying very hard to fight this problem have to make the problem as explicit as they possibly can. HIV, malaria, all of, let's say, what nature throws at humanity. But when there's a challenge that human beings throw at one another, we try to fuzz things up. We obfuscate. And I think the first step is to say, what are we talking about? That is why I call this the special case of Islamist anti-Semitism. I know that institutions like Oxford are familiar with anti-Semitism. God, how many scholars have I met who have educated me on what anti-Semitism is? But then there's this special problem, and it puzzles me that they don't want to name it. And if you don't name a problem, if you don't define a problem, if you don't look at all the different perspectives, then how on earth can you ever address it?
It's very well said, and interestingly, in this conference that we attended, the university came out for academic freedom and freedom of expression, and freedom of association, but they never mentioned the issues of anti-Semitism and racism, which were prevalent at that meeting and overt.
What we are seeing is center-left parties, for whatever reason, and maybe for a complex set of factors, they're going in a direction that, in my view, center-left parties, we call them Labour in this country. So you must think about it. These are parties, during the Industrial Revolution, they genuinely, those movements were about how can we lift poor people. Children were being subjected to working adult jobs for long hours. People's injury, you know the history of these parties. And now these parties have been infiltrated, infected, if you will, with ideas, again, that pose as social justice, equality, you name it, which is really an excuse for power, an excuse for authoritarianism, for not having to answer to anyone, for a destruction of what we call freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of association, the free enterprise and free politics. It's very sad, but it looks like we thought in 1989 we defeated the Soviet Union, and now here we are in 2019. And I think, for whatever reason, they have infected us with something in our universities and political parties, especially the center-left parties. And there, how can we say we are the winners? We're not the winners, we are the losers. And the Islamists are exploiting this, because when you say Dawlat al-Shar'iyya, the state of Sharia, or Islamic law, to achieve that authoritarian utopia through the institutions, people in the media and in politics call it peaceful, but it's not peaceful. It's just non-violent until, in their words, this is quote unquote, it is non-violent until violence is necessary. And this is exactly what they did in Egypt, in Tunisia, even in Somalia, in Iran, anywhere where the Islamists have prevailed. It's always started with dawah. Raise your hand if you know what dawah is. Wow, this is an educated audience. When I'm in the United States of America and I have an audience, sometimes 500, it doesn't matter, large number of people, I ask them, do you know a jihad? All the hands go up. Do you know what dawah is? 2, 3, 4 hands. So I think the University of Oxford is still doing something right. If you know what dawah is, if you know what dawah is, it's the phase that precedes Sharia. And if you don't understand that, you're a fool. And not just a fool, as an institution that is supposed to educate young minds on what the trending ideas and ideologies are, you are a failure if you don't know what dawah is.
Much of the anti-Semitism you see in Labour is very much classical conspiratorial anti-Semitism, so discussion of lobbies, and, monopoly control over the media, or financial institutions, etc. And actually, if you look at instances of, if you look at the demographics of the anti-Semites, they're not Muslim, overwhelmingly. They're very much atheist, secular, middle-class,
Yes.
basement activists who are just rabble-rousing on Twitter, causing a fuss and hounding Jewish MPs. And so I don't think it's fair for you to diagnose upon the left anti-Semitism as the exclusive function of Islamist infiltration into Europe. I don't think that's sensitive to factual situation in countries.
Do you know what? You make a good point there. And I really want to make it, I want to clarify. You're absolutely right. And I want to repeat it. I am not saying that the problem on center-left parties and the anti-Semitism is caused by Islamist it was there. But what the Islamist anti-Semites are doing is they're giving them an excuse to come out of the woodwork. Remember, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, it was the never again. We're not going to do this. This is the kind of thing that you can't say, you can't do, it's wrong, it's immoral. And then what happens with, I would say after Yasser Arafat and Bill Clinton come out and they can't make a deal and the Intifada starts, the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, many of the left-wing parties, some of their members, I lived in the Netherlands, a woman who was married to the central banker put an enormous flag of Palestine right in front of she lives in a Jewish community. She put it out there. She couldn't have done that if she hadn't thought that she was going to, I don't think her anti-Semitism was caused by Islamism or Muslim. She had it. She was an anti-Semite to begin with. But she thought she had the license to come out of the woodwork by now claiming that she's fighting for the rights of the Palestinians. Number one. Number two, what Labour and the other left-wing parties have laid to waste. I know in this country Tony Blair is hated, but I think what Tony Blair is doing is to say, let's go back and say, we don't want to be anti-Semites again. He's doing a really good job. Don't give these people an excuse to come out of the woodwork and be anti-Semitic because they are protecting a minority. They're not protecting a minority. This particular woman has absolutely no interest in the well-being of Muslim minorities, no interest whatsoever. She found a way to come out and say things that, I'll give you a few statements. They control everything. It's their money. They pull the strings. It's the dollars. That's the sort of thing that she was then able to come out and say, which we thought after 1945, we're not going to do that again. We're not going to take a subsection, a very small and vulnerable subsection of our population and throw them to the wolves and she's doing it. So I'm not saying that, I'm not saying Islamists caused it. What I want to point out is Islamists are exploiting it on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're being helped. They're being helped by the existing European anti-Semitism. I mean, they're propagating the elders of Zion. Why? How is that possible? How would an Arab, a Saudi Arabian, or a Tunisian, or a Somali person even know of these pamphlets? But now they're everywhere, in every language, with all the stereotypes. How did that happen?
Thank you. Professor David Patterson from the University of Texas.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ali. It's an honor and pleasure to stand this close to you. Yes, I think what you say about the Islamist...
The special case of Islamist anti-Semitism, yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot of money, the scale is huge, they're making use of social justice, prevailing social justice narrative, and yeah, they set moral traps.
Yeah, and it seems to me they not only enable the other anti-Semites, as an example you give, to come out, but and in the discourse of social justice, is there not the implication that not only is it permissible, it's morally desirable?
Yeah.
That it's cloaked in righteousness.
That's the social
and
justice.
It becomes not only fashionable, but socially required, and especially on college campuses, when young people want to be good.
Yeah.
They want to be moral. They want to stand up for those who are vulnerable, those who are weak.
Yeah.
And that, in a way, I mean, ask me, tell me your view on this. Is it the case that sometimes, especially in the young, what is good in them is exploited?
Yeah.
To these nefarious ends?
That it's the problem on the United States campuses. I don't know. Look, I don't know if we have this problem in Oxford and in Cambridge. And I've been reading the British newspapers, and I see that some of it is seeping into here, disinviting people for their opinions, that sort of thing. I thought, the British, they have that stiff upper lip. They're dignified. They're not supposed to. You don't go out and say, I'm offended. You'd be laughed at if you were offended all the time. So I don't know how big of a problem it is in the UK. When I go around my friends and I ask them, do you know what woke is? They don't know what woke is. But most people in my environment in the US know what woke is. And they're inhibited by it. And they feel trapped, and people don't feel that they can be honest and that they can tell the truth. And this, for a while, about 8 or 10 years, I thought it's a problem that's in universities, college campuses, and that once these students get out into the real world, they'll be confronted with the real world. But now I see corporations, the United States government, they're all going woke. And so that's when you have to think, God, this is a problem. And we can't laze about and just think things are going to fix, she'll grow out of it. You can't say that anymore. So you're absolutely right. This is going on, and to be very specific about what you're saying, in the woke narrative, there's a matrix of victims. Everybody is victimized by the white man. Now, to stick just with the subject of anti-Semitism, because that's what we're to talk about here. I'm not here to talk about woke culture and all its problems. I just want to talk about anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism is now a white man. Can you just even believe how this has been warped? A white man, there's a white man in military uniform, IDF of Israel, and so it is a white privilege problem. I remember reading an article somewhere with a young person, a kid, Princeton, who said he was accused of being, he didn't understand things because he was suffering from white privilege. And he responded to that and said, well, both of my grandparents died during the Holocaust. My parents escaped the Holocaust. How on earth could you think of me as having white privilege? And when they went to America, they had to start from scratch. And I think he was the first of his generation to go to college and to go to Princeton. So what does white privilege mean in that context? I have Irish friends who say that they fled Ireland. They blame the English for everything. But that's okay. And they came and they said they were subjected to the most humiliating circumstances. And now they're being accused of enjoying white privilege. So the narrative of this whole woke social justice nonsense, it doesn't make sense. No one is standing up to them. It is sickening and it's disturbing and it's alarming that institutions like universities keep caving in and in and in. I think it is perfectly possible to fight racism, segregation, to give homosexuals and transgender people their place, their dignified place in society, without having to sacrifice what we have achieved, what our civilization has achieved. And I think going back to anti-Semitism, making anti-Semitism trendy again is really the wrong way to go.
So I would like to ask you if you might give us, in your own way, what you might say in your last lecture.
Mm-hmm. I think you deserve applause. Critical thinking. And that's also what this young man asked about music. That's what it amounts to. If you have been to Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or Stanford or any of those supremely expensive universities, and you haven't walked out 4 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, and you are incapable of thinking critically, then these institutions have failed. My last lecture would say, go into these institutions as a freshman, you don't know anything about the world. Don't treat them like daycare centers. It's not. You go and learn to think, how to think, not what to think. That would be my last lecture. And I'm grateful to my professors at the University of Leiden for giving that to me. Music. I would say it would be amazing if you came up with something that goes against the grain.
Thank you so much. And there's a phrase that we use in my company called LAMP, literature, art, music, philosophy.
Yeah, literature, art, music, philosophy. If in all of those fields and in science and everything, you have to add, you have to be able to add to what we already know. And if you find yourself constrained by the prevailing orthodoxy, and now the prevailing orthodoxy is this, it's woke. It's not even an orthodoxy. It has no sense of coherence. It's silly. It's backwards. But if you find yourself constrained by the prevailing orthodoxy, then fight it. And if you can't fight it, leave. Let others do it. But the institution survives and the institution thrives, and those who come to the institution survive and thrive, and I don't know, if they stand up to the prevailing orthodoxy. So this whole thing about, oh, Jordan Peterson is invited to come to the University of Cambridge, and then he's disinvited. This particular individual is invited, and then he's disinvited. That is, you know, I would say, if I look at history and think, God, those days, they actually had to deal with the Pope. They had to deal with kings and queens. They had military, you know, you had to deal with Stalin, for heaven's sake. And now you're saying, I'm going to nix my entire research program because somebody's going to call me a racist. And I think that's wondrous. Yeah, I can see all of us, people coming from Africa, we think that just name calling, they're not going to kill you. They're not going to take your head off and run away with it. They're not going to kill your entire family. They're just going to call you racist and you're going to call off the whole thing? Come on.
So I'm going to call on Noah. Noah's a young Wiesel King scholar, and he's extraordinarily talented poet, musician, and in 4 minutes, he has a video, and in 4 minutes he encapsulates, I think, the knowledge and wisdom that takes scholars about 3 hours.
And if I say, I like your hair, will you call hash at me too?
So first I'd like to say thank you so much for being here. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to hear you speak, and especially I appreciated the part about including other types of creative mediums as far as countering certain narratives. So my question is actually about anti-Semitism and kind of where you think it stems from. So growing up as an American Jewish person, as an American Black person, and dealing with racism and anti-Semitism, oftentimes it does stem from certain types of colonialism or imperialism. And I was wondering, to what extent do you think that anti-Semitism coming from the left stems from kind of a Eurocentric viewpoint that doesn't acknowledge that Jews and other African and Middle Eastern ethnic minorities, religious minorities, experience similar types of anti-Semitism, and then kind of as a follow-up, or similar types of colonialism and imperialism that reinforce this bigotry? And then as a follow-up, to what extent do you think we kind of communicate that and bring that story to light?
So, I mean, there are so many flavors of anti-Semitism, I don't know where to begin it. On the right, there's all this, the Arianism, the Catholic Church, the Jews betrayed Jesus, the religious part of that. Anti-Semitism has been around for so long. And I really think we should put out a reading list on experts who have looked at every single segment of the source of anti-Semitism. With the Islamists, what I see are two things. There's the use of theology. First, they'll quote or cite the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. They will say the Prophet Muhammad trusted in Jews and they betrayed him, and therefore he had a license to kill them. That is carried on to that day. That's sort of the theoretical framework, or the underpinning for that. And then there's the whole Palestine-Israel thing. That's what I've studied, that's what I've understand. That has come to me as a child. I've never seen a Jew before in my life until I was 24 years or something like that. I come from a country that is not, geographically, is not a neighbor of Israel. We are not affected. If you live in Somalia, you're not affected by Israel or Israeli politics. And so, in a way, I did think, when I was made to think a little bit more curiously, to come to understand this particular prejudices, then why on earth do I hate them? I don't even know what they look like. I don't know who they are. My cousins, I hate some of them. They hated me for a reason, because we fought over a water hole. We fought over wives. We fought over horses. We fought over property. There was a reason to hate because of proximity. But we have no proximity. If you live in Somalia or in Pakistan or in Afghanistan or in Indonesia, you have no proximity with Israel or Jewish people. So then why do you hate them? And when you reflect on that, that is when you come to understand, oh, anti-Semitism. I had never heard of the word anti-Semitism until I was 24. Now, you go to colonialism, imperialism, la la la. I think that when Britain was an empire, Britain did a lot of good things, and some bad things happened. In my age and where I come from, we think it's a shame and a scandal that we can only talk about what went wrong and can never talk about what was right. And it's one of these things. It's one of these crazy things. Woke people are making us not study these things, you know. So the question of imperialism, colonialism, Eurocentrism, whatever, I think it's a much more complex. And when, I don't know, I hope when things become more agreeable, we may be able to reflect on the pluses and the minuses of what we've inherited from those years. How we can compare, say, French imperialism to Anglo-imperialism, that sort of thing. And where does anti-Semitism fit into that? I just want to point out the British fought Hitler, and that says something for them.
I was wondering if you could connect some of the, if you want to, Elizabeth, if you want to connect some of your considerations with woke.
Yeah.
To something that you said at the very beginning, when you tried to share with us a little bit about what was going to happen prior to Sharia.
Yeah.
Because I think that this emphasis on woke and what's happening prior to Sharia are deeply interconnected.
Absolutely.
So I was wondering if you could elaborate on these parallel tracks.
When the Ottoman Empire came to an end, some of those in the leadership roles were saying, what did we wrong? What did we do wrong? What went wrong? What happened? And some went obviously in the direction of, let's westernize, let's become European. The Europeans have colonized us, they've invaded us, they won, so let's be like them. But the other side said, no, let's go back, because we failed to be an empire ourselves, because we abandoned what was originally ours, what was authentic. And that is to go back to pure Sharia. So the narrative ever since, end of 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the narrative ever since of those Islamists was, let's go back. But in saying, let's go back, when they look in the mirror, they don't see themselves. They see the Europeans, the white man, penetrating, taking, imposing, colonizing, and all the rest of it. And that's the narrative that they pushed. Then along come the Bolsheviks and the Stalinists, and it's the same. I think they do find some kind of a rhyme there. So the left, the far left, alliance, dalliance, whatever you want to call it, with those who are seeking Sharia has always been there. It started with the same sort of resentment. The blaming of the Jews and the Jewish people, and especially Jewish thinkers, are being seen as traitors of the cause. They betrayed Muhammad. They betrayed the proletariat dream, the utopia. These narratives flow into one another. And if you care to look in what is now called social media, and you just have to go through the trash, that's what you find. These narratives and the way they impact people. That's why I said somebody needs to do a PhD on this alliance. And I know that some people have already done that, but it is just the way it's moving fast, fast, fast. And I think we need to, I think it's a serious, serious thing, because it's influential. It is transforming, in any case, center-left parties in Europe, in Australia, in New Zealand, in the United States of America. It's transformative. And I don't know, when they look at each other, you look at the atheist far left. In this country, you know Corbyn, so the Corbynist personality. And they go off against Western civilization and all its benefits, and all they see is negative, all they see is bad, all they see is horrible. And opposite them is someone wearing a headscarf or a beard or completely allied with Sharia. But they never get to the moment that ISIS showed us. You remember ISIS? We got a glimpse of it, where it doesn't matter what your alliance was. It doesn't matter that you hated Western civilization. It doesn't matter. They took your head off anyway. And I really think that we need to expose them to one another, that that alliance of convenience is skin deep, and it's the Corbynists who are losing.
So, first of all, I have a lot of ex-Muslim friends who, some of them live in Muslim countries, and they live completely silenced with death threats and rape threats, as you know. And they get ignored by the society, but you give them a lot of hope, so thank you. My question is, in your book, Nomad, you talk about how when you moved to America, it was the liberals who were very uncomfortable with feminism. And I don't think it's any different today with the fetishization of hijab and the return of modesty culture. I was taught in school that burqa is empowering. So I wonder, what do you think about that?
Is it innate, the left, or is it, are there individuals who are abusing, taking advantage of? Let me put it more bluntly. Is Jeremy Corbyn the left, or is the left Jeremy Corbyn? I think, I was listening to you and I thought that's probably how you want to put it. And I think it's a bit of both. I think that after the Industrial Revolution, there was a genuine question about how the ordinary man and the ordinary women were treated. And an institution like the Labour Party was on the forefront of fighting for women's emancipation, for higher wages, for people against child labor. These were all very good and wonderful questions to ask, and I think a lot has been achieved. So I don't think we can set aside center-left parties based on what we are seeing today. I do think they've been infiltrated by, yes, the wrong people. But when I say it's a bit of both, I also want to point out that there were always among the left those who demonized free enterprise and political freedom, and always saw the world through a prism of just power, those on top and those on the bottom, and nothing else. Nothing could be negotiated. You will find that history. I mean, I took political science, and it comes in a lot of nuances. And there were some leaders who were very good, and there were some leaders who were very, very bad. And I really think we are now in a place where we have a bad leadership. The Democratic Party in the United States of America, big. I think in a democracy, an opposition party, a major opposition party, is a valuable thing. And what is happening to our Democratic Party is absolutely alarming. What's happening to the Labour Party, alarming. I was in the Netherlands, the Social Democrats, Germany, the SDP, the Socialist Party in France. These parties do have to start to rethink what it is that they stand for now. And they are in a moral and intellectual and ideological confusion. And that's why you have people like Corbyn in the forefront. So that's the answer to your question. And maybe it's going to come again from universities. It's going to come from institutions like this one. People like you will come forward and remind these parties of what they stand for. They most definitely do not represent the general public. You really, I'm talking to you, you're from Sierra Leone?
No,
from Ghana, and you represented the OAU. When I was little, we used to call it the OAU, Organization of African. What do you call it now? The African. The African Union. I really feel sorry for you that you had to be put in Somalia.
I was actually in Addis Ababa, but I had the Somalia portfolio.
You had the Somalia portfolio, gosh. What you said about, and your description, just on an empirical level, if you could please tell your fellow anthropologists here and everywhere else, just tell us what you see, don't tell us what you think or what your views are, just report on what is, and that's exactly what is. If people believe these things, then they want to act that way, and if you want to fight Ebola or HIV or poverty, I mean, I was in the Netherlands and loads of Somalis are in debt, and these Dutch officials are asking me, what can we do about it? And I said, they're in debt because they'll take money from welfare benefits or whatever they work and they'll send it home. And if you send every penny home, you're going to stay in welfare. The collective prevails. So if you really want to get to the bottom of these issues, it's inescapable. You do have to start talking about culture. And what I've seen in the years that I have been here is that people are uncomfortable, supremely uncomfortable to talk about culture. If you don't talk about culture, you're not going to resolve. You can't answer, the psychiatrist can't do his job, you can't do your job, I can't do my job. And then we just keep going, we'll go into the next generation and repeat the same mistakes, and the next generation, but you do have to discuss the superstition. But when the superstition is put on the forefront, people get offended. Why would they not get offended? They'll get offended. But it used to be that you talked past the offense. Imagine in the smallpox epidemic, if people said, now I want to hug my loved one, you wouldn't argue with that. Obviously you do, but these are the consequences. You have to make a choice. You have agency. This is science. And this virus or bacteria or germ is indifferent. It doesn't care about your culture. So do you want to live for the next generation, or do you want to go with the person in the grave? They never ask that question. That is, I think, where you and I come in, where you say you have to force them to understand this. And it will for us, we're going there. Liberal feminism, gosh, I don't want to be fired. I've got many colleagues who feel exactly what you have described, which is if you're a white woman and you have fought for you're a liberal and you're a feminist, you don't say anything about people of color. So the Me Too, they will denounce and condemn Weinstein, what's his name? I'm not particularly a fan of Hollywood, so I don't really know much about what goes on there, but what's his name? Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein.
That one, Harvey Weinstein, and what is the guy from? All of these individual, powerful white men, but they're very, 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 they don't know what to do. Do you know how many women were abused and subjected to the sorts of things that came out? Bill Cosby, there was a black guy. It took them a long time to say anything about it, and they're actually not doing it. And then there's radical Islam. And then, I'm looking at the African contingent there, the view on women in Africa. They're not going to address that because deep down they believe this is something that African women need to do themselves. Muslim women need to do themselves, and so on. And tragedy is, I was raised a Muslim, and I come out and I say, well, this is what's being done to us. Can we stop it? And you are an Islamophobe. So as a Muslim woman, as an African woman, you're going to have to fight on the level of within your own community to change things. And then you're going to have to fight these darned liberal women who are calling themselves feminists, but who are really an obstacle, which is a tragedy. But over a time, we just think of them as a joke.
So, Ayaan, first of all, I want to say, on behalf of everybody here, we wish you continued strength and success, and we're really grateful that you came here with us tonight, and thank you for sharing your time. So
Thank you.